Well, welcome everyone. Denise is unable to join, so as vice chair, I will be running the meeting with the support of Katie, thankfully. I think I think everyone knows each other with the exception of Mary, who will be speaking shortly. So maybe we can just save that introduction for her turn. And I'm not sure if there's any other members from the public with us at this point in time.
Doesn't look like it.
Okay. Well, with that, I think our action item is to review and vote on the draft July 8th meeting summary that Katie provided. I was not at that meeting, so if someone else would make a motion, or if we have any questions, changes.
This is Bob Fisher. I'll make the motion.
And is there a second to that motion?
I will second if I can, since I wasn't a member at that meeting, but I am a member now. But if I can, I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Perfect. Approved.
Any discussion or abstentions?
Thank you, Katie.
Yeah, that's okay.
I'm just
Nice job.
abstaining
Nice
because
job,
I
Amanda.
don't think I was at that meeting.
Okay.
It wasn't either, and I wasn't sure if that was a problem for quorum, but I abstained also.
Sounds like hearing none. We can move forward with approval. Do you want me to re-ask for another motion, Katie, or can we?
Nope.
Okay. Well, we're moving along in our agenda, which is good news. So the next item on the agenda is an update on the Vermont CAC reimbursement process with Mary Perchlik from the Lake Champlain Basin Program. Mary, so I'll pass it over to you, and if you just introduce yourself and a little bit about your position, that would be very helpful.
Okay, yeah. Hello, everybody. My name is Mary Perchlik. I work at the Department of Environmental Conservation for the Lake Champlain Basin Program. So as you probably know, the funding gets divided between the state and LCBP, and I work on the state side. So I help manage and report and track and account for all of our projects that we're funding through the state. Part of my role is helping approve the invoices for the CAC. So that's what I want to talk about to you guys. I know it's been a challenging process, so I apologize for the delays in getting the checks. Basically, the best practice for getting paid through the state is to upload your reimbursement claims regularly. Like ideally within a 6-month period, you would submit a claim. So I would suggest uploading them on the quarterly basis that Katie has set up. If you plan to submit, like, you don't have to, obviously. I know some of you haven't been, and that's fine. If you don't plan on doing it ever. If you do plan on doing it, that way your account within the state system stays active. So you don't have to reset up your account every time. If you go longer than 6 months, you'll have to reset up the system. And if you have to reset up the system, it requires a little bit more involvement and requires reaching out to my colleague in the business office, Stephanie Lamphere. So I can include her contact information. I know she's still waiting to hear from Lori Fisher. I think she still needs information from you and from Carol Ode. So those are, if Lori and Carol could reach out to Stephanie, that would be the path to getting your reimbursement. And if you have more questions on how the state system works in terms of your account and why it's set up this way, I would recommend talking to Stephanie about that. But basically she needs your social security number and a mailing address confirmed. So she, however you feel comfortable giving her that information, probably best to do it over the phone. And I'll include her phone number in the chat. So if you have any questions, happy to answer them now.
Lori?
I don't have a question. I'm just reiterating a comment. I think Katie, you and it might have been Mary, it might have been somebody else reached out to me. This was after submittal many times, and I don't take the reimbursement for myself. I do it as a donation. But so it was overly complicated, and I just noted I'm in the midst of a busy field season, and this is a low priority to do. So I will get back to them at some point, but it's not a lot of money. And so Mary, if you just want to pass that on, that's where I'm on this right now.
Okay, yeah, I mean, the biggest, if you don't need the money or if it's on your own schedule, then, that's up to you to reach out to Stephanie. So we're not necessarily like, if you don't want to get the check, then you can give her your information when you want it. But you'll have to reach out to her to set up your account.
Understood. I was told I already had to do that after submitting many times. So I understand it's a process. It's just, a lower priority right now.
I totally understand. And I understand that it's been confusing and unintuitive and overly difficult.
We appreciate you helping us figure it out. Senator Brock?
Just to note, in case any of the other legislative members aren't aware of it, the legislative members have a different process for submitting for reimbursement, and the reimbursements both for hours and also for travel expenses are submitted to legislative operations, and they are paid through that venue.
Great. That's helpful to know. I think Sarah had checked in with someone about whether the legislators submitted through this process. So maybe
it goes to legislative operations, and it goes to Mike Ferrant at legislative operations.
Great. That's good to know.
I had one question, Mary. When I'm just wondering if when the reimbursement check is sent out, whether there could be some like note about what it's covering, because it's a little bit like unclear when the check is received what reimbursement payment it was referring to, and maybe that's just a matter of me going back to what I filed and looking at it and figuring that out. But if there was a simple way to like have a line of a memo describing like which quarter or whatever in the in what's sent to the member, that would be really helpful.
Okay, I can pass that feedback on to our business office. It may, I'm not sure if it's possible or not. I think the ideal situation is to get on a schedule where the payments are paid quarterly. So you submit quarterly and it gets paid quarterly. I think because there's so much lag in getting everyone's system set up because I didn't have the, for a lot of reasons. But if now that your system is set up, or once your system is set up, you should get the check more quickly, and then you won't have like such a buildup of many quarters. That's like the system that we're aiming for.
That sounds great.
Any other questions for Mary? Great. Well, thank you again for helping us figure out this process and for being here to explain it. I think it's helpful to just get everyone on the same page about what's required and how we can make sure everyone can get paid if they're interested in submitting those reimbursements. So thank you.
Yeah, happy to help. Thanks for having me.
All right, Karina, are you ready to change hats?
Yes. I'm just looking at Hillary's note. I have to go attend to the
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No worries.
Something that was supposed to happen early this afternoon appears to be happening right now. So I have to go deal with this. I apologize. I was excited to be here after missing a few meetings, so I'll be back as soon as I can.
Thanks.
Okay.
Hillary.
And I think, so yeah, what's on the agenda for the rest of the evening is my presentation on dam removal. I think Katie asked me last week, so it's sort of a last minute thing. So I haven't done a ton of preparation, but I was able to, sort of use another presentation that I've had and done recently. So I'll transition to that. And I think after that, we were going to talk about the action plan. But know that I don't want to be speaking at you for the next 40 minutes. So feel free to ask questions as I move through the slides. And it's really just to familiarize you all with the work that I'm doing with VNRC. And with that, I will share my screen. And Mary, thank you so much for joining us. You're welcome to stay on. I think you know most of this, but I appreciate all your help with the reimbursements.
Thanks. Yeah, I'd love to stay.
Awesome. Can everyone, am I in slideshow screen for everyone?
Yep.
Perfect.
Yep, looks great.
Okay. And it's hard for me to see people when I'm presenting, so just speak up if you have questions. Don't be bashful. So yeah, I am the restoration ecologist from Vermont Natural Resources Council, and I manage the dam removal program in Vermont. And so in that role, I guess I do two things. One, I chair the Vermont Dam Task Force, which is a group of scientists, regulators, and interested citizens who want to promote the work of derelict dam removal in the state. And we come together to share projects, prioritize projects, and share, technical issues that we're having on projects, how to move projects forward, permitting issues. And we meet every other month to do this. And often we go to field sites, etc. And then in addition to that, I work to manage dam removal projects in areas where there aren't other folks to do the work. So my first job is to try and find, when we identify dam removals that are important in the state, is to try and find a watershed organization or conservation district or other folks who will take on the project. And I am happy to provide expertise and help support funding, grant writing to do so. And if there isn't a watershed organization or anyone that we can identify who's willing to take on the project, then VNRC can take on that project. We typically end up working in watersheds where there isn't watershed organizations. So like I tend to have a lot of dam removal projects in the southern portion of the state in the Otter Creek watershed because there isn't a watershed organization in that part. The Lamoille watershed is another area where there's a conservation district, but they are busy with a lot going on. So I've helped support projects there as well, and as well as the Winooski. So I'm just going to give you a background today about how we prioritize projects, what some of the projects that we're working on, and sort of the process. And I will say that this started with something called the Vermont Dam Removal Initiative, and that initiative came out of the Vermont Dam Task Force, which has been around. So I will say that I've only been working in this position for 4 years, and the Dam Task Force has been around for almost 24 years. So they've been around a long time. But the Vermont Dam Removal Initiative was spawned out of the Dam Task Force, and the goal of that initiative is to raise awareness for the benefits of dam removal, identify derelict dams within the state, across the state, prioritize those projects, and collaborate with partners. Since we started tracking, which I think was in the 1980s, we've removed 66 dams from our watersheds as of 2024. So this graphic slide on the right shows that list of dams and where they are. And, you know, just from last year, we removed 5 more in 2023. So, and there's currently at least 3 underway as we speak. So it's really moving along, which is exciting. And a fundamental part of understanding the benefits of dam removal is understanding the framework of watershed ecology and understanding that rivers exist on a 4-dimensional framework. And so this concept is understanding that rivers move both laterally across the floodplain. They move longitudinally up and down a river system. They change over time, and they also have access to groundwater, so that vertical dimension. So the 4-dimensional framework of watershed science is a really great way to understand the benefits of dam removal and think of reconnecting rivers in all of those ways. So, you know, when we remove a dam, we're removing a barrier that's, you know, keeping a river from moving up and down longitudinally and all of the sediment and water and aquatic organisms that want to move that way. But we're also giving a river access to its floodplain that it wouldn't have had before with that barrier. We're also reconnecting groundwater to the river system, that dynamic moving flowing system that may be backed up behind that impoundment and warming up as it sits there. And then we're also understanding that rivers move over time and channels change and new features form as they move. And so it's this constant process. Another huge piece, this is another graphic that I find really helpful in educating folks about dam removal, is the river, it's called the river continuum concept. And it's this concept that biota, flow, and habitat are this continuum. And when we have a dam, that continuum is disrupted. So we need that constant flow of biota, we need biota, flow, and habitat to have a river. And that's the river continuum concept. As soon as we put a barrier within that system, it changes that system. So it becomes, you know, a river is supposed to move, it's supposed to transport, it's supposed to flow. And when we put a barrier in that system, water warms up behind that. It turns a river into a lake-like system. Different species, warm water fish species, prefer these lake systems than the river systems. So from trout, we might have bass or sunfish, pumpkin seed. The temperature warms up, the dissolved oxygen decreases, the turbidity decreases, and we have fragmentation to the system, which restricts the movement of sediment, of water, and aquatic organisms, including fish passage. In addition, dams, they cost money to maintain, so it's a lot of work to keep these dams going. They are a liability to their landowners, so they're liable for maintaining them and for any risk that they might cause if they were to fail to downstream landowners or infrastructure, and they're a public safety risk if they were to fail, just with people like to swim behind dams or play on dams, fish off of dam. So those are all factors that go into our work reconnecting river systems. Any questions at this point? Everyone's quiet. Okay. So some unintended consequences related to dam removal is that temperature change. So when we create sort of a bathtub when we have, and not all dams are the same, but it's just this basic concept of when we block a river, we warm the water behind it, we create this impoundment, and that creates a warmer temperature to the river system. The substrate changes, so all of the substrate that accumulates behind that dam, the sediment, changes where that substrate normally would move downstream and build new point bars and floodplains. It impounds itself, and the fines build up on top, and you have this aggradation of sediment behind the dam itself. You have the fragmentation of the river by putting that concrete barrier in the system, and that creates a discontinuity for aquatic organism passage and for the whole river system complex. You also, invasive species are often introduced into these impoundment systems, whether it's, someone's backyard aquarium that they dumped in there, but there is that ability for invasive species introduction within these impoundments. And then the benefits of dam removal is that restored lotic habitat, the thermal refugia, so it's that cold water that aquatic organisms, particularly native brook trout, need in their life cycle and during warm weather. And when rivers are low, they can move to those cold areas. And that's where that importance of having that groundwater connection to the river system is really important for fish species. And it provides habitat. So in addition to the fish being able to move up and down the system, the nutrients and the food, the organisms that feed the fish can also move down that system, and the leaf matter, the woody debris, that's all really important to the system itself and to the species within it. And it provides increased biodiversity and genetic connectivity. So when, brook trout, as an example species, have more access to river miles and increased habitat, they also have access to have ability to have a higher genetic, I don't know what my word, I'm having trouble finding my word there, but it definitely improves genetic species genetics. And resilience, certainly with dam removal, there's improved opportunity for resilience because we are taking away this public safety hazard that can exacerbate flooding, and we are restoring the natural stream function and process, which gives that river the ability to have access its floodplain in future storm events and have the space to slow that water down. And that's that floodplain reconnection as well. And that resilience can also come in the form of improved water quality and improved habitat and increased biodiversity, of course, as well. So the dam removal process, I've just boiled it down to a quick 10-step process. I'm going to go into a few of those steps in a little detail, not spend too much time, but it's, it starts with project selection and then developing support for the project, fundraising for the project, And I will say that developing support and the fundraising continues throughout the whole project. So that's sort of an ongoing piece. The design, so then we move into design when we've raised the funds to move it forward. And then from design, we go into permitting if we're going to move forward with this project. Once the design's out and people have shared it and support it, we have to fundraise more for the implementation, but we reach out to folks to continue to educate and share the project. And then we go into the removal, or also it's called the implementation phase, where we're actually removing the dam. And following removal of the actual dam, it's restoration of the stream channel. And that depends really on the site, but it can be creating the new pilot channel, restoring the floodplain, the wetland, replanting vegetation, and that's followed by monitoring. And what's my last, whoops, sorry, I went ahead by mistake there. Can't see my number 10 in the slide because of this bar here. Time, yes. So these projects take time. So far, the fastest dam removal that we've done in Vermont is 3 years. So it's not a fast process. With project selection, so this is just sort of a little bit how we identify projects for dam removal. And it really depends on our funding, but ecological impact, so aquatic organism passage, flood mitigation, wetland restoration, water quality benefits, these are all things that we consider when we're looking at projects to prioritize. Additionally, we're looking at the hazard potential classification and the condition of the dam itself. So some projects are prioritized and moved forward by dam safety. So dam safety will reach out to us and say, this is a project that I think is a good candidate for dam removal. Owner interest. So, you know, we can have the highest ecological prioritized project, but if we don't have landowner support, we can't move that project forward. So owner interest is a huge part of this process. And some projects, there's a tremendous amount of owner interest, but we might not have the ecological benefits or the hazard potential. And then ultimately partner support. These projects are so much stronger when we have a multitude of partners involved with them. And these are some of our partners. And these are both regulatory partners and funding partners, but Lake Champlain Basin being one, with NUIPIC, DEC, FEMA, and Vermont Emergency Management, Watersheds United Vermont, Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Department, through the Department of the Interior, are all partners, and there's so many more, all the watershed organizations in Vermont, Trout Unlimited. So lots of good partners. Fundraising, so just back to that fundraising puzzle. The fundraising piece is something that's just ongoing through the whole process. There are grants out there. There's never enough grants out there for the amount of work that's out there. And the grants are competitive grants, so they take time and a lot of resources to complete, and then to meet the deliverables of the grant. We found that the projects are strongest when we can leverage funds, and a lot of the grants do require a match commitment. So it's, you know, it's, if I can get X number from Lake Champlain Basin program, then U.S. Fish and Wildlife is interested in the project as well. And perhaps if U.S. Fish and Wildlife is supporting the project, then Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department should as well. So it's really figuring out how to leverage partners and funds. And the fundraising is never, it's never like a one-time thing. You have to fundraise for the first phase of the project, which would be the design, and the design is often broken up depending on the funder into different phases. And then you ultimately also have to fundraise for the implementation separately. So as you're doing one, you're already thinking about the next. If you're in the design process, you're already fundraising for the dam removal. There are certain areas of the state that are prioritized and targeted for fundraising based on priority fish species, water quality, or even, unsafe dams. Timing is critical, certainly, for just like if you miss the deadline, then you don't have the funding. And I would say that there is the most funding for implementation, but there is less funding for design. So it's harder to think about the design piece, which needs to come first before the implementation. And then even harder to find a way to pay yourself to do the work that you're doing, that you're paying the engineers and the contractors, the excavation companies for. Oh, sorry. And this slide just shows sort of the breakdown of the design. And we typically start with a feasibility study. So a feasibility study is sort of the first step. If the community or the landowner thinks they want a dam removal, but they're not sure, they'd like to see an alternatives analysis to look at the economic cost difference of repair versus removal and what the benefits of each would be. So a feasibility study would often include that alternatives analysis and sort of what the initial barriers that come up to the project would be. So, and then we would move into the design, and the design is typically broken up 30, 60, 90. Sometimes we can go straight through full design depending on the priorities of the project and the potential risk of, dam safety or other. And then permitting and ultimately construction of the project. The removal phase is certainly the most exciting part, because you've worked so hard to move this project forward for the past 2 years with fundraising, permitting, and design, and now you actually get to celebrate it. It is certainly typically, and all these projects really are different, but you have heavy equipment on the site. You have excavators in the river. It looks messy. It's a disturbance. It's a temporary short-term disturbance for a long-term benefit, because it's not easy to take out a big concrete dam, and it's not easy to remove that sediment that's accumulated behind the dam for 200 years and put it somewhere where it can be safely spread or accumulate and stockpiled. And then ultimately the restoration is the fun part, where we get to plant trees and really monitor the site and have natural regeneration and include the community in the process. So the removal phase is definitely exciting and important. So now I'm just going to sorry, I'm moving back and forth here, into a few of the projects that VNRC has managed recently, and just show some slides about them. And feel free to ask questions. This is Mill Pond Dam in Colchester on Indian Brook. And this project was finished as I came on board, but I got to be around for some final touches on the dam removal post October 2019 storm event. I don't know if you guys remember, but there was a pretty big Halloween storm in 2019, literally a week after this dam removal had completed. And this, the Mill Pond Dam is on Mill Pond Road in Colchester. It's over 200-year-old dam that had been there on Indian Brook and created a fairly large impoundment. I think it was almost 5-acre pond, so a big pond. behind it. There was a tremendous amount of sediment that had accumulated, fine sediment that had accumulated there over time. So this was a big project in requiring a lot of sediment removal. That being said, not all of the sediment that had accumulated was planned for removal. So some of that sediment, it was identified that the downstream reach below the dam was sediment starved because it hadn't received sediment for so long. So the design of this project was to let some of that sediment pulse through the system over time as the channel, as the restored channel, which we call the pilot channel, sort of revegetated and stabilized post dam removal. That being said, we had this Halloween storm a week after construction was done. Everything had been seeded and mulched. The site was looking great. And then this huge storm pulsed through, and a few gullies were created after that storm. And really those gullies didn't appear in the original design because they had been underwater. So there was these spring seeps feeding the pond, feeding the river, which was a pond before, that were under the pond. And once that dam was removed and the river was flowing, you could see these spring wetland connections to the river that didn't surface before. And those springs also had surface water flows that drained into them that contributed to some erosion in the gullies, or even just natural shaping of these smaller tributaries that were feeding that system. So we came back out in the spring of 2020, and this is not uncommon, and I think it should be sort of planned for, that there's this constant monitoring of these sites to make sure that they're revegetating successfully. And if there are issues in areas that need buttoning up, to come back and revegetate those. We stabilize those with some coconut fiber mats, and just did a little bit of gentle grading to sort of lower the incision ratio in some of those side channels. But this was a great project. And then in 2021, we removed the Dunkley Pond Dam in Rutland. So this was in the city limits of Rutland. And this was a challenging one in the fact that it had urban soils. So it fell within the urban soils layer, which means that any sediment removed on the site needs to stay within the urban soils layer of Rutland. So we couldn't take the soil anywhere but within the city of Rutland. That being said, we found a site to stockpile it, and it, after 2 years at that stockpile location, it can be used by the contractor at other fill sites within the city limits. But this was an excellent story of basically there's a series of homes, multifamily housing units right adjacent to this dam site. And the fire chief for the city of Rutland had to evacuate those homes 7 different times, including in 2019 during that storm event, because of flooding issues associated with the dam. And in 2019, that same October storm that I was talking about with Mill Pond, they actually evacuated and then had to perform an emergency breach on the dam to lower the dam to reduce flooding for Route 7 is immediately downstream. And then there's Rotary Park, which is even below that, and the housing as well. So that emergency breach happened, and then we came in 2021 and fully removed the dam and restored the channel upstream and removed that sediment that had accumulated behind the dam. And I included, and this is Todd Maniz, who's a river engineer with the state, who's on site, and you can see the recently restored floodplain for this dam removal. So we're looking down towards the location of where the dam was, and you can just see the river now has access to this floodplain, which it hadn't had before. And then I also included the sign that we created, which was a requirement of our Section 106 compliance, which is through our federal Army Corps permit. We also had compliance with historic preservation to basically document the history of the dam and why we've chosen to remove the dam. And so this sign is on Route 7. If anyone's traveling through the city of Rutland, they can stop and look at the sign. And I think it just tells a nice story of how we are where we are today with this project and the history of the project, not just from when it was a dam, but from what the river provided before it was a dam, which was, you know, to 10,000 years of an important waterway for the people that lived in the area at that time. And then also, you know, how it was a dam through history, which is pretty cool as well, because it was a mill dam. It was an ice pond. It was a hockey rink. It was a swimming hole. So there's definitely a lot of history just with the dam itself. And then ultimately with the dam removal and restoring a free flowing river again. And this dam connected 10 miles of river habitat that was fragmented before. The Mill Pond Dam that I spoke to earlier on Indian Brook connected 31 miles. And then this next one that we did in Castleton, Vermont on North Breton Brook reconnected 37 miles of river habitat. And this project was prioritized because it was a really important brook trout fishery and brown trout fishery. And the state of Vermont owned the dam. They had purchased the dam. It's a marble dam. It was originally built as a mill pond dam and an ice pond dam. They purchased it as originally hoping to have a fishing pond for a warm water fish species area. That was never successful because the dam was full of silt and sediment and really didn't act as a pond because it wasn't dredged or excavated anymore, that sediment that just filled up behind there. And so they recognized the value of North Breton Brook as a brook trout fishery over this, you know, warm water pond. And we removed the dam for that benefit as the priority in that case. And so this is a picture of the dam on the left, and then the same view, which is from the bridge, looking upstream with the dam removed and the restored river channel. And you can see that floodplain access, improved floodplain access as well. In 2023, last summer, we removed Connolly Pond Dam in Shrewsbury, Vermont, which is a headwater project, which was kind of exciting. This was a dam that Dam Safety brought to our attention because it was failing. It's a huge earthen dam, so really different than these stone dams that I've been showing you pictures of, like the old mill dams. This is an earthen dam that's like 300 feet long and 30 feet wide that had been created. I think NRCS actually used to build these dams and promote the construction of these dams for livestock water supply as well as fire suppression. So this was had been a fire pond that was no longer used and maybe had been a livestock water supply at some time. It was only built in like the 1940s or 50s. But basically a bunch of trees grew up on the earthen dam, which is not a good thing to do if you're trying to maintain an earthen dam. You don't want trees growing up because the roots fracture the dam. And the dam was leaking, and there was a town high road, Northam Road, and a house and a series of culvert infrastructure downstream that was threatened. So this was I think it was a significant hazard dam. And so what Dam Safety did is they did an emergency drawdown in 2021 to draw down the dam. And this picture is before we actually removed the earthen dam, but it just shows, I love this picture because it shows the wetlands, the groundwater that's feeding this headwater tributary. And after the drawdown, the vegetation just popped, like there's just so much, it had been impounded underwater for so long, the vegetation popped, and you can see all these little features, wetland features that are feeding this stream. And it also is a really important brook trout fishery. It's a tributary to the Mill River, which then flows into Otter Creek. And this is the project that I'm currently working on, which is Wainwright Mill Dam in Salisbury. And this is another old stone dam, stone and concrete with some really old twisted rebar. It's over 200 years old, and it at one point was one of the biggest mills in Addison County, and it was abandoned, and the dam was never taken down. And this is below the fish hatchery. If you're ever driving on Lake Dunmore Road and you're familiar with the fish hatchery, this is downstream. The river is called Tributary 10. And this dam was brought to our attention through water quality monitoring that was being conducted on Tributary 10 through Addison County River Watch Collaborative and the state. And I'll just say that Tributary 10 is an impaired tributary, and it's impaired for nutrients, and it's believed that that impairment is related to the fish hatchery and the effluent from the fish. And then this dam, which is downstream of the hatchery, is likely exacerbating that impairment because it is stockpiling all of this sediment and water and nutrients behind that dam, and then just releasing them over the top constantly without having any, without restoring the natural river process and function with the dam removal. So this one was extra complicated in the fact that there was concern about leaving any of the sediment on site and really wanting to remove it all, even though the downstream reach also hasn't received sediment for that long. So in the end, we worked with the engineers and the state of Vermont to come to an agreement of we're removing 4,000 yards of sediment from this dam, which is half of the estimated sediment that's behind it. And that sediment is being trucked to a permitted storage site with the contractor. But that basically elevated the cost of the project almost double to include the trucking fees and identifying a new site, and that amount of in-stream work to remove all that sediment upstream of the dam takes a lot, puts a lot of extra impact on the river system itself, because you're digging all that sediment out as you work your way upstream. So we're still trying to balance how much sediment is the right amount of sediment to remove related to these dam removals. And this is another dam that is in Northfield, Vermont, Cross Brothers Dam. This is a rendering that shows the dam as it exists now on the left, and then what it would look like with the dam removal on the right. And this dam is an example of a dam that's been prioritized for removal through Vermont Emergency Management, and the preliminary engineering study that we had, which included a benefit cost analysis for FEMA, identified that the removal of this dam and some of the work that needs to be done in the channel to restore the channel will lower the flood elevation by 2 feet for 10 homes in this area that have a flooding history. So a huge benefit, and this project's estimated to cost about $1 million, whereas one FEMA buyout can cost half of that. So it seems a lot more affordable to remove one dam for $1 million and save 10 houses than to continue to pay for these floodplain buyouts. So this one is certainly about flood safety, but it's also, and the Dog River is an incredible trout fishery, and this project's prioritized for trout as well. So it's an exciting one and it's moving forward. We're in the final design phase right now and hope to remove this dam in next summer. I'm almost done. I think I just have 2 more slides. So thanks for bearing with me. I'm not hearing a lot of questions. Rouleau Pond Dam, this is in Williamstown, Vermont, and this is a dam that basically overtopped and breached in the 2023 July storm event and caused a tremendous amount of damage downstream to the town of Williamstown, Vermont. It's a significant hazard dam because of the infrastructure that's downstream in the community. It's a privately owned dam. It's built out of granite and was built by one of the granite companies in Barrie. One of the landowners of that granite company wanted to have a camp in Williamstown, and he basically took a wetland that was behind in a stream that was behind this property that he had and dug it out and built a big granite dam and then built a camp along it. And that was his seasonal camp that then he sold that land. The camp was turned into a full-time year-round house, and the dam continued to exist. And then the dam was badly damaged last year. Vermont Dam Safety came in and required an emergency breach of this dam following the 2023 storm. So we worked with Dam Safety to lower the dam by 4 feet and remove some of that sediment behind it to stabilize that. And that's how the dam is in its current state now. So it looks very different than this picture here. But the rest of the dam needs to be removed and the channel work upstream needs to be restored. So this is another one that we're working on that's prioritized for flood safety. And lastly, the restoration outcomes of these projects. It's about reconnected rivers, which allows for increased species resilience, diversity, and habitat. It's restoring natural stream process, and that's not just the hydrology, but the vegetation and the soils as well. And it's reconnecting rivers to wetlands and floodplains. It's improving water quality. It's providing public safety and removing liability for landowners. And it's improving recreational opportunities. A lot of these projects have improved public access post dam removal. So sometimes that's formal with like a Vermont River Conservancy easement, or it's a new bench and signage and parking lot to access a section of a river reach. It provides a tremendous amount of community outreach and education related to river process and function and the benefits of dam removal. And it provides support for watershed organizations to continue doing this good work. And with that, I will open it up to questions. I have one more slide.
Well, hi, this is Bob Fisher. Not a question.
Yeah.
Wow, great presentation. Excellent. I'm sorry, I apologize. I knew where you worked, but I didn't know what you did. And we can talk at the next meeting. But like the Klamath dams they removed recently.
Yes.
Yeah, I was the fishery biologist in charge of the federal, and back in '93 to '95, and the Yurok tribe, and yeah, so many other things like that. Yeah, exactly. And you hit all the things. Actually, sediment transport, in case people don't realize that. I mean, like obviously, like the Columbia, they've imported below those large dams huge amounts of gravel, because once you put a dam there, it's just eutrophication. You're making a field in the end, and everything stops. So wow, excellent presentation. Sorry, just blast me back to a life I hadn't thought of in many years. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. That's awesome that you were part of the Klamath. And it's been really fun to follow those.
Oh yeah, no, we can talk offline on that.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it's yeah. Well, it's not a success story. I mean, it is now, kind of. Sorry.
Andrew.
Yeah, I also had a comment, which is great work, great leadership. I have had a chance to work with all the Northeast states on aquatic connectivity, and Vermont really stands out in part because of this dam task force that brings all the partners together and, does their work so thoughtfully and as you laid out. So thank you for your leadership. Couple questions. I know it's not in your name, but does the dam task force get involved with upgrading road stream crossings for aquatic connectivity, either associated with a dam or separate from a dam removal?
Really good question. We, yes, associated with a dam. We certainly, often our dam removals also include culvert replacements or even bridge box, other options when there's a road crossing involved. So certainly there, we are, the dam task force strictly is kind of dams, but we manage a site called Free Vermont Rivers, which that name was intentional to include other barriers in addition to dams. And so my work specifically is about dams, and that's the funding I have, but often there's culverts, and I support that and promote that. And I'm also part of another little side group that's called the Barrier Removal Group that works to look at those. And I know there's like culvert removal groups in each watershed really working to prioritize and identify culverts. So I hope that answers your question, but I do think it's something we need to consider to think about in the dam task force as well.
Great. I have another question, but I'll let Lori go. Lori,
okay.
Go first.
Oh, no, go ahead. Finish your question, Andrew. I'll go after you.
Okay. When you're planning for a dam removal and the conditions that you hope will be there after the dam is removed, I assume you're kind of using historical flows and conditions as kind of a baseline, but is there also a consideration these days of trying to really expect that the frequency and intensity of floodwaters is going to increase, and so you just design a system based on that rather than what has been seen in the past? I don't know whether that makes sense or not, but
no, I think it does, and I think it's a good question for us to continue to think about. And to be clear, I'm not the designer, but I'm reviewing the hydraulic analysis, hydrologic and hydraulic analysis, and we are definitely using like inundation mapping more and updating that inundation mapping where we don't have it. And there's certainly a need for more inundation mapping in Vermont, and that will help with our modeling related to dam removal in the future. But I think it's a question that we need to continue to think about, because a lot of engineers are still designing for, the 100-year storm, which is now the 1-year storm event. So we have to update our standards or design practices.
Great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Lori.
Thanks, Karina. That was great. It's really encouraging to see this work, and wonderful to see those visuals too. Really showing some of that success. And apologies if I missed this, but I'm wondering if there's, a priority list of high priority dams that tick all the boxes for ecological restoration, and where we are with those. I understand that in certain cases you've got to go to willing buyer, willing seller, and take advantage of those opportunities as they arise. But I know we're both involved in, I'm thinking, the Swanton Dam removal, some of those that would be very important for ecosystem health in Lake Champlain and in the entire watershed. And just wondering how the prioritization happens, and and where we are with those, top high priority dam removal projects.
No, I think it's a really important question. And to be Well, I guess high level, there isn't an updated list other than internally the Vermont Dam Task Force has a list of projects that are sort of, we have them in different buckets of active dam removal projects identified but not moving, and then, you know, ecological priority rankings based on different things. And again, you can have a high ecological priority for fish passage, but not necessarily for dam safety or vice versa. So depending on which prioritization, it's a little bit different. And then also that affects the funding piece a bit as well. That being said, TNC in 2017 created a dam screening tool for Vermont, or at least for the Lake Champlain Basin portion of Vermont, to be clear. And that is, that list is, we're working on trying to update that list and receive funds to update that list because it's static. But it's a great resource, and they, you know, basically put 17 different criteria, ecologic priority criteria into a model and then tried to prioritize that list. Lower Swanton Dam being the most important, the highest priority on that list. And I think the Peterson Dam was second. So right up there as far as priority. And that list needs to continue, like more dams have coming forward that weren't even identified before that have been found. So they need to be added to that list. And is that matrix, that modeling still accurate, and what could be changed? How does that change with flood resiliency? So I think it's an important question, and it's really hard to look at all of those things as it relates to each of these projects because they're so different. So that's what I can tell you. And I can put the link to the TNC dam screening tool in the chat too. That might be helpful.
Thanks.
Yeah. Any other questions? Cool. All right. Well, I'm trying to multitask here while I look up the TNC screening tool and we transition to the Lake Champlain action plan. But thank you guys for listening. And Katie, maybe I'll pass it to you to pull up the action plan and we can go from there.
Yeah, and thank you for your presentation and for stepping in late in the game. I really appreciate it. But like Bob said, you know, you guys don't always get to hear what you're all working on. And I think everyone in this committee is working on very relevant things to the whole committee. And so it's nice to take a minute sometimes to reset and remind ourselves what everyone is doing outside of this committee. So before we get started on the action plan, I just wanted to share, so Senator Brock, Allison, and I were at the FNLC meeting yesterday, which was great and featured a presentation by the state climatologist, Leslie Ann Dufigny-Giroux, and a couple of the highlights from that presentation that she shared were echoed in Karina's presentation around flood resilience, including the importance of connecting our rivers to their floodplains, and just wanted to highlight that has come up in multiple places now, not new. Oh, and Mark was there also. Yes, thanks for coming on camera to remind me, Mark. Yeah, so I don't know if anyone else who was there wants to share some highlights from that presentation with the rest of the committee. That would be great.
Yeah, I can just add, I think Leslie Ann may have given a similar presentation to, I don't know, to maybe to the clean water conversations possibly, because I'd seen some of those graphics before, and I thought that it just put into context so well the precipitation issues we've been having this summer, and that, you know, if you were to look in recent memory, you would think, oh my goodness, Vermont just floods all the freaking time. But we've had periods of extreme drought followed by then periods of like heavy precipitation and really wet years. And so it was interesting to put it into context and to get some concrete data around all of these like really catastrophic events that have been happening, but put it into like historical context was really interesting. And her use of the National Weather Service data was fantastic. I think she put it into like, you know, layperson's terms in a way everybody there could understand what we're dealing with in our state. So if you ever have the chance to see Leslie Ann present about climate in Vermont, it's fantastic. So I also really enjoyed the presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah, and that piece about it's, you know, not all flooding. We have been experiencing periods of drought. That's been coming up a lot in the Basin Program Steering Committee and other advisory committee discussions as well. So I think important to keep that in mind in the phrasing and framing of our action plan too. Well, your action plan that I helped you produce.
Our.
These are your ideas.
The whole floor occur on the baseboard.
So I will pull up the action plan. I'll drop that in the chat again because I think some folks joined after I put that in initially. And I'll also share another Google Doc right before this meeting. Nina Gage from the Agency of Ag got back to me on some questions that I had sent following our last action plan drafting session. So I'm going to give everyone a second to read through that. It's pretty lengthy, so I don't want to read that aloud for the group. So if you just want to open that that second document there, you can see Nina's responses to questions asking about the funding landscape for water quality assistance and farm diversification and what the outlook for that is, how oversubscribed the programs have been, and where additional support might be needed in new or existing programs to help advance farmer support and water quality goals. And we sent this out in hopes of making any ag-related asks a little bit more specific, since during the presentations last year, there were questions about, well, which specific programs are you talking about? And didn't have specific answers to that. So this still, my quick scan of it might still be a little bit general, but it's definitely helpful. And Karina and Denise and I are working on scheduling meetings with Secretary Moore and Secretary Tebbets and folks from their staff to dive in a little bit further on the action plan priorities between our next meeting. I'll stop talking for a minute and give you a chance to read.
Katie, can I ask a question? Are you scheduling the meetings with Secretary Moore and Secretary Tebbets to go over the draft action plan? Okay, so it's not like we'll complete the plan and then approach them. We'll go get feedback from them and then refine the plan based on their feedback.
Yep, that's the goal. Yeah, we did that. We had that meeting a little late last year, so we're doing it in advance of finalizing the plan this year.
Thanks.
I think with that, those answers that Nina sent, I would say if there's anything within there that you think we need to dig into a little bit more, please make a note of that and let us know. And Denise and Karina can bring that up during the meeting and hopefully get some more clarification. I was hoping Nina would be able to join the meeting today, but she was not able to.
This is great information that Nina provided. Thanks for getting it, Katie.
Folks just raise their digital. They're done reading, so I know when to move us on.
Katie, will you remind me of the timeline for the action plan?
So the goal is to have a final, I think, and we can discuss the how we want to do this, but the goal is to have a near final version by the end of the next CAC meeting on October 7th, which will be a week earlier than normal because Indigenous Peoples Day is on the 14th, which is the second Monday of the month. So continuing with our recent trend of not having our regularly scheduled time. So thanks for your flexibility on that. Usually there's some edits that happen over, usually small edits happening over email, and then we'll approve that pending those small edits. And then Elizabeth from the Basin Program will format it beautifully, and the committee can review that visual. And then hoping the week of, again, with scheduling conflicts, our regularly scheduled meeting time in November is a holiday on November 11th, Veterans Day. So we'll need to figure out when we want to move that meeting to, but the November meeting will be that public rollout for the action plan. And where we landed most recently with the discussion was it would feature a state of the lake overview. But if there's a different topic folks want to dig into, that would be a broad public interest. We could do that as well.
And do we have a date for the November meeting?
No, so we were leaning towards the 14th, but I will be presenting at a conference in Massachusetts that day, so I can't do the 14th anymore.
Fair.
And I know Denise has a conflict the following Monday on the 18th, so I think right now we're looking at the 12th, 13th, or something the following week, that 19th through 21st.
Any of those work for me.
Okay. And I'll put that at the top of the action plan.
Katie, is there something I should be doing right now? Everybody looks very
Oh.
diligent.
Sorry. Welcome back. So Nina responded over email to some of the questions that we had sent. So in that second link, Google Doc link, That's what folks are looking at. And then the
Excellent,
link
thank you.
before is the action plan. So we'll revisit that in a minute. And Denise and Karina will be meeting with Secretary Moore and Secretary Tebbets and some of their associated staff between now and our next meeting. So if there are follow-up questions you have on what Nina sent, make a note of that and they can ask at that meeting. Are we ready to dig into the action plan?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I can share my screen. I think many of you are in the document itself also. And I'll make all of you full size over here. Okay. So right now we're kind of in the ballooning phase and we'll need to pare it back down eventually, but I don't want that kind of editing to get in the way of making sure everyone gets their ideas and priorities on here. And we can always edit. Good at taking the red pen to things later on. So thanks to everyone who contributed over the course of the summer through those action plan drafting sessions and leaving comments in the document in between. That's been very helpful. I want to remind folks again that you all have a lot of expertise that I don't have. So if there's something that you're like, well, this is obvious and should be in there, you know, speak up if you see something that's missing. Hillary brought in some really great perspective at the last meeting that, you know, we all don't have, and it's great to get her you know, practitioner's perspective on how certain programs are going and how they can be improved. So just keep bringing that to the table because that's what'll make this a stronger document in the end. So one thing that we were trying to do is make sure that everything that's listed in these priorities section here, this bulleted priority list, is reflected elsewhere in the document. So that's what has contributed to the sort of new sections and growth in this advanced floodplain adaptation and resilience section, is making sure it reflects all of the pieces above. We will probably need to cut some stuff here, but again, we can work that out in the final stages. But we do just want to make sure that anything we mention up in this summary section is reflected down below. And now we have some of these ag numbers, which is great. So I will add those in post this meeting. There are some pieces also that were just copied over from the 2024 action plan that may or may not still apply. So I think we'll want to think critically about that kind of stuff too, whether it's still as much of a priority to include at this stage, or if it can be a talking point, or if it doesn't need to be in there at all. Making sure that it's not muddling the ask of this current priority action plan. And so, yeah, these highlighted sections are two examples of that. I think we have made an attempt to edit this piece up top, but this infrastructure one with wastewater and septic systems is a carryover from last year. Let's see. I don't know, my mouse really does not want to scroll down today. Okay. AIS, we've added some reference to the work that's underway in New York and Quebec. I think that was a great call and suggestion from Andrew. We still have a public access and recreation section in here that wasn't identified explicitly as a priority at our retreat or the previous meetings, but nobody has elected to remove this. So I think we'll see how it fits in the final version. Or if we can embed any of these pieces into other parts of the document. This is another section that I think will need some attention, this prioritized land use and development that reduces water quality impacts. just in response to the kind of feedback we've gotten about not being specific enough about asks, there are some things in here that I'm not sure will have the supporting points to say exactly what is needed for a couple of different things Andrew noted. Would be helpful to have a better understanding about the changes to Act 250, and that is a valid question. So we can discuss that some more. So, and then developing solution for contaminants pollution, we've taken a stronger focus on chloride pollution in this iteration, still with some reference to the other compounds of concern, but the committee has been working towards trying to focus that section in a little bit more on something that's more actionable. So that's the big overview of where the document has been and where it's headed. I will open the floor if folks have particular sections they want to dig into or questions or concerns, please speak up. Mark?
Thanks. And I don't know if this is public comment or how you want this approach for any of my comments. I have a number of things I wanted to mention. So I'm an Act 250 district commissioner, and it's so soon in, like, Act 250 is still trying to figure out what's happening. I don't think there's going to be anything meaningful in the next 6 to 8 months as they're trying to figure out what is the actual impact of the changes to Act 250. That's just my sense. We just had a lunch and learn a day or two ago, and really everyone's just still figuring out what does it actually mean, let alone how to implement it, and then what will be the impacts of the implementation. There has been very little permittee activity related to those changes. So people that had permits that are now exempt aren't coming back right away to say, hey, I'm exempt, get rid of my jurisdictional opinion and let me build my project. And there isn't a flood of new projects coming in yet. So I just, for prioritization, I'm not sure that Act 250 issues will be really relevant unless it's just a placeholder for this legislative session. So last night, I had the feeling, and I think I mentioned to Katie, when Dr. Dupree-Giroux was showing some slides of 1927 and then 2023 and the alignment of where were the impacts. And it was on roads, and the roads were, you know, she said, it's like this. They're exactly the same. You know, 27 was the storm of record for most of the state, Irene for the southern part of the state, and 23 is for other aspects of the state. And, you know, my first thought was there's just not enough money on the planet to deal with what we have to deal with unless we aggressively move to restoring the floodplains and removing dams and things like Karina presented and is working on. And building in floodplains just doesn't make any sense anymore. So that's sort of my two fresh comments. I was listening to the Lake Champlain Basin Program Steering Committee meeting, and I know that septic systems have been something we've discussed. I was advocating for and never really made it to a priority. This morning, the Lake George Planning Commission, who implemented in 2023 new, much more restrictive regulations on septic, mandatory inspections with any parcel within 500 feet of Lake George, shared an update, and Katie can maybe share with everyone the presentation that was given in June to the New York CAC, which was much more septic focused. Today's presentation had broader, you know, Parks Commission impacts on invasive species management and other water quality aspects. They have a broad authority there. But what was alarming in my perspective has been that Lake George is a very wealthy demographic with a high priority for water quality. And what they found, So there's 2,500 parcels inside the Lake George management area within 500 feet of their regulatory zone. And they're doing 500 every year over 5 years. That's their cycle. They have a full-time seasonal staff person monitoring, coordinating the cleanouts, the inspections, et cetera. And it's alarming. What they found was 23% of those septic systems failed, and another 15% were substandard, meaning that they did not meet the design parameters for functioning within their use. So a camp that had been converted or expanded, yet the septic system hadn't been increased. And, you know, they noted the challenges that Bob has reminded us about with when you are getting into increased enforcement or increased certifications, where does the septage go? And what are the haulers going to do with it? So there's a number of issues. But it caused me a lot of concern because we haven't received any meaningful information from A&R regarding what's happening with septic systems in the state of Vermont, let alone within some proximate distance from water bodies. And if that is a reasonable sample size from Lake George, that 40% aren't functioning properly, should be really alarming to us in the state. And I wonder whether the CAC might consider reviewing that, thinking about it, and looking for additional updated information and our own sampling on what's going on with septic systems within a certain distance of water bodies within the state, particularly around the lake. I know that I've spent a lot of time in the lake this summer looking around, and with high lake levels, I look at places and there's no way that their septic systems are functioning with any distance between the surface area, their deposition area, and where the water table is immediately adjacent to the lake. It just can't possibly be functioning as a septic system. So I know that it hasn't risen to a high level of priority in the last few years with the action plan, but that sample size and location and demographic and my sort of bias around how I think about Lake George caused me a lot of concern. And I wonder whether the CAC might consider prioritizing septic work, analysis, et cetera. And maybe it's a line item in the basin program that we go out and do some research that hasn't been done. I know Bob's shared 58 or 57, I forget what his magic number is, that in Vermont, one of the highest in the country, wastewater disposal is in septic fields of parcels. And as all the research I've done, the best I get is that's late 1990s EPA numbers, and I don't see any updated numbers, and certainly any requests we've had from the agency to support that, we've never seen anything. So it sort of ties into how are we going to successfully meet any of the TMDL phosphorus reduction goals, and it takes everyone. And I just can't imagine that there aren't issues related to the septic systems around the lake and around water bodies in the state. And last is that I know that we have for a decade said we have to rework the MOU between Agency of Ag and AAFM and ANR and DEC. And we didn't participate in the petition, but I'm aware that EPA has instructed ANR to move forward and figure out how to actually manage agricultural wastewater within the DEC. And I think that should be a question when CAC is meeting with Secretary Moore and Secretary Tabbets, is an update on what are they thinking and how are they going to be responsive to the EPA's demand letter of sorts. It wasn't actually an action letter, but it laid out a path for how they can actually comply with the Clean Water Act. So that's all I got. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. Lori?
Thanks. I echo Mark's concern about septic. It seems like it's been a very long time since there was any analysis done on that. I remember quite some time ago, the initial read was that septic systems had a localized effect, but not a lake-wide effect. But I think that's very, very dated information and not comprehensive. And certainly, given what Lake George has found, I think it behooves us to investigate that. So we should maybe have a further discussion, a presentation on it, review the, if you can share the Lake George, the New York CAC presentation from that with us in advance, Katie, that would be great. And we can see, it may be multifold that we want to try and advance some study to look at that, but also some action. And it would be good to find out what the state is doing in terms of, when were the last inspections, et cetera. And then with regard to the corrective action, the EPA, as VNRC, Conservation Law Foundation, and LCC were all part of the petitioners. We were not allowed to talk about anything at our previous meetings because we were in discussions and negotiations that were all confidential and subject to a confidentiality agreement. But that letter is public. I'll put it in the chat. And you can see our press release. I'll put links to that as well. Okay. And the Agency of Natural Resources is required to come up with in 90 days, I believe, a corrective action document. So there will be movement on that and more discussions, and there will most likely be a legislative component that we will want to stay on top of and fully support. And there are very clear findings. These are EPA's findings. They did their own investigation after the petition and in response to the petition. So I think there's a very clear directive there.
Thanks, Lori. And I put the New York CAC, the presentation they received, the slide deck for that in the chat. So you all should have access to that, and I'll include that in the meeting follow-up materials as well. And if you can share that letter and the press release, that would be awesome. So it sounds like revisiting septic, if people are supportive of that.
Yeah, I really appreciate, Mark, your comments and Lori's comments. And I think it's hard for me to think about the action plan and then I think we had septic in there a couple years ago, at least a sentence, but trying to drill down on specifics in the action plan. So I encourage you to add potential text that you think would be helpful, because I feel like the action plan is sometimes, I definitely think septic falls within the advanced flood mitigation adaptation resilience area, but
It's like we have
thinking
a
about
fair
that.
amount of text related to septic, but I feel like those statistics are so compelling. So I don't know if we can call out bullets with the percent failing and the percent that are substandard, because it's close to half.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think if not in the document, I think those will be helpful talking points during the presentation, because I don't know if we want to use the limited space we have to put stats about New York. I don't know if that'll land as strongly, but open to discussion on that point.
Yeah, I'm happy to put in some language that I think could be some steps. I think I noted before that we don't even have a requirement of a certification on property transfers, which I think surprised a lot of people. That's a fairly simple thing that is part of the transaction. It's a nominal cost, and if you have a septic issue, the septic tech shows up and he's got cameras and et cetera, and he knows what's going on in $300 or $400 in an hour. It's a nominal cost in a real estate transaction these days. And then prioritizing areas of concern within 50 feet or 100 feet. I think there was some discussion at the meeting today where, you know, within 35 or 50 feet, there's a lot of bang for the buck of identifying failing issues in stream corridors. And just to note, I think that I think I heard Secretary Moore express some concern. She asked about the sample size and tried to hone in on, is that really representative? And I think she was as surprised as a lot of people with that sort of 40% not failure, but, you know, non-functioning or worse. So I think she'll be open. I know that has to be buried with issues and understaffing and underfunding, but she certainly seemed interested from what I heard. So I think she'll be receptive in a conversation. Hopefully.
It sounds like this is a really important issue. I guess my question is, it seems like it's hard for me to get my head around how big a scale of an issue it is in the geography of Vermont's portion of the Lake Champlain Basin. And, you know, are we talking about zooming way in on septic systems near the lake, or are we talking about some kind of analysis to figure out where we need to focus our efforts, or something else? What is our sort of concrete ask at this point, and where?
So, and it was interesting last year in a New York CAC presentation. I forget who brought the information up, but they had essentially the similar database system, ArcGIS, and showed all parcels within a few hundred feet of a water body within the basin on the New York side. I asked whether we could do that in the Vermont side, and have never received any meaningful response. We specifically asked Julie if she or one of her staff could provide that. It just as a starting point. How many parcels are we talking about? Would be the first. And then where do we think would be priority? And has there been any investigation around that? The only response that I received was there's not enough money. So the state funds repairs or replacement of failed systems, and there's never enough money. It's always oversubscribed, which is kind of an answer, but not really. So it strikes me that we could do some database analysis with existing information and try to figure that out. We know where wastewater systems function, municipal systems, and we know the rest are some form of on-site disposal, whether it's a cesspool or a proper septic system. So we could identify those without too much work, I would think, as long as there was, you know, a decision to say produce that data, that it's an overlay on one of the database systems. And then from there, we might be able to figure out additional questions, additional analysis that might want to be had regarding its impacts. But I know that within a short distance of the shoreline, as I go up and down the lake, there's lots and lots of systems that are within the floodplain of the lake, under 102, 103, and at lake levels at 97 or 98, they can't possibly be functioning. And so that seems really fairly simple to try to figure out those places. And then do we prioritize like Lake George, once every 5 years, you have to certify that it's functioning for those prioritized locations, you know, shoreland parcels. That to me seems like a relatively easy start. And if we knew the numbers of how many parcels that represents, we could make some quick decisions, I think, about what our next steps as far as a assessment and then you know, sort of remediation inspection process might look like.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Thank you, Mark.
And the TAC at Basin Program this morning was asking for priorities for line items and other research questions. And I wonder whether the CAC might consider that, given, you know, the state has not had the capacity apparently to be able to provide that assessment. And whether we had a third party do that as part of Basin Program analysis and do it basin wide. It seems like New York DEC has that information fairly readily available. And then, of course, Lake George has, you know, real-time work going on that's showing results and also what the challenges or problems are.
Mary has her hand up, so as an employee of the state, I wonder if she has a comment on that.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that everyone knew that we have 2 years of line item funding for the wastewater program at DEC. The first one is to do a training series. This is through LCVP, so you might already all know about it, but to do a training series, workshop training series on for installers and designers and maintainers of wastewater systems. That's ongoing right now through Vermont State Colleges, a contract with the Vermont State Colleges. And then we have another project, research project, to do research on installing wastewater systems in like clay loam soils, like which is a lot of the soil in Addison County. So we've talked to just internally at the state, Bruce Douglas and Kristen Schmankas with the state wastewater program, and they're interested in pursuing a lot of the projects and questions that you're talking about, Mark, about creating a data layer that has the permits that we know of so far, and then going a step further to try to identify the project, the permits and systems that we don't know about. I think they had estimated like they know about 200,000 permits at this point. But there was a lot of exemptions for permits up until the 90s. So that's something that we talked about developing in the next cycle, funding cycle for, I guess, I don't know, fiscal year 25. So I think it would be great if, I know that's a high priority for the wastewater program and something that they'd reached out to us about funding. So I think it would be great if we could, you know, support them in that and had more, if, you know, you guys decide it's a priority, I think that would support the wastewater program and what they're hoping to accomplish.
Yeah, and hi, this is Bob Fisher. Just quickly, I believe residuals sort of would have that. Obviously, people that don't pump their systems, but since 99.4% of the of septic tanks are delivered to wastewater systems in Vermont, and those all have to be reported by the wastewater systems, the gross volume. But the haulers, I believe, are supposed to keep a record of everywhere they ever go. If you were able, to also add that database, you could get a lot of outliers that way, in my opinion. Thank you.
Thanks for that context, Mary. It's really helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. I appreciate that. I knew that the training was going on, but I wasn't aware of the, clay loam sort of alternatives or functionality was happening too. I agree. I think that first pass at what are permitted and what's that database layer look like would be really great. What I thought was really interesting is in the failed systems in Lake George of, let me see, 11, 21, 32, 49, 76. Of 76 noted failed systems, 27 were cesspools. So I imagine that those would not be permitted. So about 30% of the failed systems, which was 25% of the first 500, don't hold me to those numbers. I'm doing really rough math looking at charts. But a lot were cesspools, and presumably cesspools are not permitted or are grandfathered and wouldn't show up in a database. So there's a chunk of information that we would need to get to perhaps some of the most challenging wastewater systems. But I agree. So if we can do that through the basin program, if the state can't fund it, I think the CAC might consider that.
We have a couple minutes left. Any other action plan issues, comments, questions that folks want to bring up? In this moment, we can talk a little bit more about the action plan and then maybe make a plan for the October meeting if you want that to just be action plan finalizing, or if you want an informational presentation as well.
This is Bob Fisher. So how many pages are we at? Are we just at 2 at the moment?
We have more text than that, but I think with some creative formatting, that always helps. We want to be at 2. We have 4 pages right now. But I think there are certain things this evening that we learned that we can probably cut, which is great. And then last year we had these July 2023 flood impacts in, which I think this would be worth talking about now. So the comment on this was that it would be more helpful to maybe have some of the socioeconomic impacts in addition to the environmental impacts. So maybe we can discuss if we want to use space to put these kinds of stats in again, or if we want them to be talking points, or how we'd like to proceed with that. Still working on getting some more of those socioeconomic statistics to refer to, because I think that people can connect to that a little bit easier sometimes than, the amount of phosphorus going into the lake.
And hi, this is Bob again. I mean, they did do more than 2 pages, but Lori would know. That's like 15 plus years ago. They used to do 4 pages. So we kind of made a decision a long time ago to do 2, but I'm not imposing that upon anyone.
At the last drafting session, I think there was consensus among that small group that we'd like to try to keep it to 2 again. But open to others' feedback on that.
We did have, many, more of a extensive documents in the past, and I think we are, for some of these materials, we're going to have backup talking point documents for all of them. So whether we're going to include some of those key talking points or in the action plan and make it longer than 2 pages, I just think we need to plan for that because there's for all these things, we will need to give some context.
Yeah, I was going to say something very similar. I like the idea of keeping the action plan short, easily readable, something you would pass out and people would get the key points. But then we have appendices or supporting documents that are available on each issue or however we do it.
Anybody else? Okay, so our next meeting will be October 7th. I will work with Denise and Karina. I think we might do another small group action plan drafting session between now and the meeting with the secretaries, just to get things cleaned up a little bit more in advance of that meeting. But how do folks feel about that October 7th meeting? Are you interested in an informational presentation, or do you just want to focus on the action plan? I'd be happy to speak to the Lake George Park Commission if you want that presentation at this stage. I think they'd probably be willing if they're available that day. They've spoken to the New York CAC several times about this. You'll also have access to those slides. The meeting wasn't recorded, so we don't have that, but up to you all, or if there's a different topic you're hoping to dig into before the plan is finalized.
You guys heard of, and are people going to the 30 by 30 summit that's supposed allegedly on the 7th? Does that sound like, have other people heard of that?
I have not.
I haven't either. I thought
Please
they
share.
Well, we're going to have an ag water quality partnership meeting on the 7th, and we were told we shouldn't because everybody, like everyone, is going to be invited to this meeting. But then I haven't seen it announced anywhere, so I wondered if you guys knew about it.
Yeah, I saw it announced. I'm part of the Conservation Commission up here in South Hero. It's new, and I always get it wrong. Association of Vermont Conservation Commissions, AVCC. I think the NRC has been doing a lot of work supporting that fledgling organization. They had a save the date in Randolph, I think, for a statewide conservation summit on the 7th. I have it on my calendar. So it does sound like it's happening, but they had zero other information available.
Okay. All right. Well, just in terms of, we might all be driving back on the 7th from Randolph, maybe it sounds like.
Right.
That's helpful to know. Thanks, Hillary. So should we choose a different day that week, perhaps?
Or we can wait and see how this materializes, except that it's happening, like it'll be our next meeting.
Yeah. That's
Yeah, I think now that Mark said the summit through AVCC, I don't think there's an agenda out yet, to be honest, so I don't know what time it ends, but I would assume that it's a day thing and not an evening thing.
Maybe it's over at 3 and we'll all be home by 5.
Will you have energy to
scheduling,
approve an action plan, though?
how tight it is in October already, so I'm fearful of changing the time,
I know. I was thinking the same thing.
especially when they don't have anything out yet.
We can just get them to give us a room in Randolph so we can attend the CAC remotely.
Well, we'll stay tuned for more details on that, I guess, but plan to forge ahead with the 7th in the meantime. Do we want to schedule an informational presentation at that meeting?
I feel like it depends how far we get with the action plan. It feels like there's still a lot of work to do on it. So
Yeah.
I do like the idea of having like a small group in the interim of people who are available on whatever date gets picked to help maybe winnow some things down.
And I think that slide deck that I shared from the New York
Pretty
CAC covers pretty much everything they'll say verbally. So, and maybe I can snip the parts of the steering committee meeting recording of the Lake George presentation today and send that out as a reference material also. But okay, great. Well, thanks everyone. I appreciate you all being on a beautiful night and working on the action plan. And Mark, thanks for providing that context on the septic inspection. I think it's been an important issue for the New York CAC, and I'm sure they would support similar efforts in Vermont. So.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I know you had a long couple days.
And Mary, thank you so much for your contributions as well.
Yeah, thank you, Mary.
Thank you everyone for all your contributions.
Thanks for having me.
Everyone.
Have a good night, everyone.
Good to see everyone.
Bye.
Sun.